Alright, put down your pitchforks. I understand. Avengers Endgame is amazing, and we all love it. But this is the thing. There are problems with it. I understand there's problems with everything, but there's a major problem with it that is a huge plot point that I can't help but point out and I want to talk about. And that would be the problem with I don't want to say the time travel necessarily. It is a problem with the time travel, but it's kind of a problem with the focus of what the movie was about, and that's kind of what comes into play with what's wrong with the movie. And what's wrong with the movie is very end with the big battle, which is where we get a bunch of our hype moments. You know, Captain America catching the hammer, the big part where all the Avengers come together and we finally get Avengers Assemble. And, just, all the fan, what do you call that? Poo. And, of course, the moment where Iron Man says the famous line. And the thing about it is that whole battle shouldn't have even happened, because according to what we're given and told in the movie, it physically shouldn't be possible. And what I'm talking about is how Thanos and his entire army got there. Because if you remember, the whole movie can be cut up into about 3 different parts. The first hour, because it's almost 3 hours long. The first hour is seeing what happened after Thanos did what he did, and everybody kind of reminiscing, coming together, and then finally planning the heist. And then the middle part could be about the heist and, the sacrifices that happened during the heist and what happens. And then the last part can be about them snapping, bringing everybody back, and then Thanos and them popping up and starting to cause a whole bunch of havoc. Well, if you remember in the beginning part where they're planning the heist, Ant-Man stresses that the Pym particles, there aren't that many of them, and they only have enough for everybody who's going to be doing the mission to jump where they're going and come back, and then enough for one test run, which, you saw Hawkeye did. And the thing about this is whenever Rhodey and Nebula are about to come back from completing their mission, Nebula all of a sudden has a problem because of her and another one of her being in the same timeline or something. And she's falls down before she's able to hit the button and then go back with Rhodey. And whenever that happens, of course, the other Nebula, Gamora, and Thanos show up and they capture her, and then they switch places, her and the bad Nebula, and the Nebula shows up, and whenever they snap whenever Hulk snaps his fingers and brings everybody back, she's in the room bringing Thanos and everybody through the time machine. Well, according to Ant-Man, she physically shouldn't have been able to do that, because whenever she came back and took the place of the other Nebula, she used her other Pym particle, so she technically didn't have any more Pym particles left. I'm not sure if it's true, but somebody told me that they heard somewhere where somebody interviewed the directors and they said that someone, they reverse engineered the technology for them to be able to do that. But for one, if that is true, I feel like that's a pretty important thing, and maybe you should include that in your movie, considering it's 3 hours long. And if you didn't, which you didn't, it's kind of a bad move. That would help explain a lot. And even if you did, it didn't explain the fact of all the suits that they didn't have, because, of course, one thing that happened in the beginning was the suits that were crafted so they could survive traveling through the quantum realm to do the time traveling. And so a lot of things are missing when it comes to the villains coming back at the end to cause that huge battle. Which, don't get me wrong, that's where, like I said, a lot of the things happen where we get a lot of the moments that make us, woo, cheer, and, we're happy about. But it technically shouldn't have happened the way it did because of the time travel and Thanos and all of his minions not being able to come through the portal like they did. And I know that that's kind of like a bummer, but to me that's what the focus of the movie is, because if that is just what's supposed to happen, and it kind of takes away from like the first hour and a half, 2 hours of the movie where they're explaining how how important it is that they survive and how important it is that they don't get lost in time and that they hurry up and get the stones and then that they're there to get and then come back. And this is all pointing to what I say about the focus of telling a story, because if they made the whole purpose of the movie about the heist and of course losing Black Widow was like the only person that they lost to in the heist to bring everybody back. Of course, that is a big sacrifice because we haven't lost any of the Avengers, of the main 6 Avengers technically throughout any of the movies, and to lose Black Widow and then bring everybody back, it definitely means a lot, and it would definitely mean a lot from our sacrifice. But to then have the whole army of villains come back and have to fight them, it takes away from the focus of the movie about it being about the heist and then bringing everybody back, because then they had this huge fight at the end, and then Tony of course had to sacrifice himself for no reason because it's the only way they could beat Thanos. But technically they beat Thanos whenever they just time traveled and then came back, because Thanos had no way to time travel and get to where they were, even though of course at one point he did have the time stone and he could reverse time, but he didn't have the ability to go back to a different timeline, I don't think, because they never showed that in there.